Good morning. How's it going, guys? Today is going to be something completely different. Today, being in North Carolina, we are set out to find some history. Well, you see, I am a car nut, a gearhead, a motorist, enthusiast, whatever you want to call it. Anything and everything to do with racing, well, that's me. So, being in North Carolina, it was kind of hard to pass up the opportunity to go in search of history. You see, we're a NASCAR nation. Can't help it. So we are setting out today to find a bit of history. You see, we're headed to Asheville, North Carolina, which NASCAR had its roots sunk there extremely hard. Man, if you was a race car driver, you went to Asheville, North Carolina to race. You see, the new Asheville Speedway, well, it's still there. But not a lot of folks know that it's actually still there. They've turned it into a park. But it is actually still the original speedway of all those years ago. Those years ago when NASCAR was really rubbing his racing. Drivers would get out on the track and duke it out for the championship. You see, New Asheville Speedway was the home of one of the biggest rivalries in NASCAR history to ever exist. That was between Jack Ingram and Bob Presley. Hey, it got so heated on the track that a fight actually broke out. Jack Ingram actually ended up head-on collision with another car because he was mad because he got spun out. Knives were drawn, cops were called. It was pretty bad. But for NASCAR, well, it sold tickets. People come to see the racing. They loved the rivalry that went on between Jack Ingram and Bob Presley. It was unmatched in anything at the time. And see, that was real NASCAR racing back then. Rub into each other, bump into each other, spin each other out, get out, fight out on the track, call it done, shake hands, walk away, and be the best of friends. So, we're going to head to Asheville. We're going to find New Asheville Speedway, and we're going to see what we can see. You always have to honk when you go through a tunnel. It's just, you just have to. So as a side trip on our way to Asheville, we went ahead and hit the Blue Ridge Parkway just to cut across, but we stopped up here at the Water Rock Knob Overlook. As you can see, the elevation is 5,800 feet, because I wanted to show you the amazing views you can see from the top up here on the Blue Ridge Parkway. Well, unfortunately, not so grand today. But it does give it a very beautiful ambiance actually driving through here, because we're literally up in the cloud line for today. There is a lot of bad weather coming in the next couple of days. Fortunate for us that it hasn't actually hit while we're here, and we will be gone before it hits. But unfortunate that we really did want to have some snow while we were up here. And it will be snowing here in the next couple of days for sure. But definitely adding to our list of things to do, the Blue Ridge Parkway. We would like to do the whole thing. I think it's about 460-ish something miles. But not today. Today, there are no grand views from the top of the Blue Ridge Parkway. So here are all the things that you should be able to see. So we're just gonna say, well, yeah, that's out there, but not today, folks. Not today. It is really cool in a way though, because you're not gonna be able to see it on camera, but the wind is actually blowing, and well, you may be, but the fog or the mist, maybe you can see it a little bit. It's really cool. It comes through like big waves.
Tell me, buddy.
He was trying to get me going, wasn't he? I like, just like, you know, pedestrians on the line. You're on a bicycle, you go on the ground.
Oh, it's a bicycle track.
So there it is, folks. One of the most famed racetracks in all of NASCAR history, the new Asheville Speedway. As the locals called it, it was just affectionately known to them as the river, because, well, the river literally runs right along the backstretch. And through the years of racing all the NASCAR here, there was actually many a car that ended up in the river. The outside turn walls here are still the actual original walls from the famed new Asheville Speedway. The black guardrail that you see was added later on whenever they turned it into a park. They've actually turned it into like a skating park, a bicycle track, whatever you want to use it for. But it is still the actual speedway that is underneath all of that. Back in the heyday, this would have been packed full of race trailers, pit crews, all the sorts of things. The cars would simply enter right here, go into the pits, and come back out. Many a famous NASCAR driver duked it out right here. Heck, the king himself actually raced here. Yes, Mr. Petty himself. Dale Jr. actually did some laps on this track, but never actually officially for a race. He was here doing some tire testing for Goodyear and actually made some laps around this very track himself. And if you look back through the history, well, Dale Jr.'s grandfather was actually the first champion ever crowned on this track. It is 1/3 of a mile in total distance around. The banking was increased slightly after they turned it into a bicycle park, but for the most part, it was only by a few degrees. I could only imagine sitting in the grandstands, watching Bob Presley simply dominate this track for years and years and years as being the most feared NASCAR driver to run this this 1/3 of a mile track. NASCAR decided that old Bob Presley had had enough. They wanted to give him a challenge. So he was coming up on yet another championship race here, and the promoters decided to add a little shebang to that. Well, that's where old Mr. Ingram comes in. You see, NASCAR promoters actually went out and got him to come here knowing that he was the hottest driver at the time to run a NASCAR race. And well, they stuck him on the track head to head and they battled it out. They passed each other numerous times, switching back and forth between the leads. And well, finally come down to getting close to the end of it. And well, old Mr. Ingram got spun out. It actually wasn't by Bob himself at all, but it was Bob's cousin that did it. And well, that made old Mr. Ingram pretty mad. So, both tie rods on the front end were broke. The tires were splayed out. He didn't have anywhere to go, so he sat there on the track, right down here in this corner. And he waited for old Mr. Bob's cousin to come back around. And when he saw him, he hammered it. And they actually had a head-on collision out in the middle of the track. NASCAR fined him, banned him from the track, called the cops. They were going to have him escorted out of here in handcuffs. It was unheard of. The NASCAR spectators had gone crazy over the whole entire incident. But to NASCAR, all that meant was more money, more publicity, more tickets being sold. Heck, they even had a night here when a knife fight broke out between the drivers. Yes, the new Asheville Speedway has seen much history through the years of NASCAR racing. And, well, there's a many of folk that come here that have no idea that what they're standing on is actually one of the most legendary NASCAR tracks to ever exist in Asheville, North Carolina.
There you go. That's YouTube footage right there, folks.
Crazy kooky kids. You take them to the Speedway, you never know what's going to happen. Oh, I'm leaving that in the video. So, so where they're standing up on there is actually the original embankment, but they did increase a little bit of it whenever they made it into the bicycle track. It's actually a bicycle track now. But we are actually walking on the famed track itself right now. And below all the asphalt and the concrete is actually still part of the original surface of the track. So while they have the start line roped off or painted off right here, that was not the actual start line for the Asheville Speedway. The actual start line for the Asheville Speedway would have been right here. This little entryway right here on both sides of that would have been the tower for the flagmen to stand on. But when they redid it as the park and the bicycle track, they moved the starting line from here to there. The history of this place is just phenomenal. I mean, I couldn't have imagined what it would have been like here with the likes of Bob Presley, old Ingram himself, the Pettys, the Earnhardts. It would have been an incredible race to see back in those days. And again, we're not talking about that newfangled NASCAR stuff that goes on now. No. This track is part of the dying history of NASCAR when it was actually really racing. This infield right here would have been incredible to see with all those old cars in here. If you're interested in the history of these old tracks like I am so much, you should really look it up. Dale Jr. is actually doing a series right now. I believe you can get it on Peacock, but he's doing a whole thing about the lost speedways, where he is traveling all around the country finding all these lost speedways and documenting them and talking about the history of them all. And while we're fortunate enough to actually still be able to see the asphalt and the concrete of this old speedway, there's a many of them that are just out there in the middle of the woods, and people have no idea that they're actually even still there. But if you're up to the task of doing a little bit of adventure work and a little bit of hiking, you can actually find all of the lost NASCAR tracks. But this was pretty awesome to see. Like I say, I'm just a motorhead in general, so just to get caught up in the history of this is just an incredible thing to see. So, the Asheville Speedway, or like I said, as the locals called it, the river, well, it got its name because, well, there's the river. And the backstretch of the speedway was actually right up next to the river, so the locals just affectionately called it as the river. Well, there was a few of them drivers that would make it around these corners and hit this backstretch, and well, they just weren't so lucky. They'd end up running off the track, and well, they would find themselves in the river. There were actually an old few cars that were left, kind of just mangled up along the river's edge and stuff like that, but they've long been taken out, and well, disposed of finally. But we're still going to browse around down here in these old brush piles and see if we can find anything still laying around. But all along the back stretch of the speedway right here where we are, all of this would have been parking as well. So you would have entered the track way over here, you would have come around this way, and you would have ended up back here behind the track. And as it was, well, several people would make their way in back here, and well, they would just never see the turn, and they would end up driving themselves right off into the river. Well, I guess them spirits being brewed in Tennessee and crossing the borders was probably pretty popular back then as well. So, a little moonshine, go out to the NASCAR track for some races, put the two together, and well, there's the river. Well, after making it off that first turn into the back stretch, barreling down through there, which wasn't very much of a straightaway, they just had enough time to just kind of try to get up to speed before hitting this last turn right here before making their way back around to the start line. Well, as you can imagine, there was a lot of bumping and banging went on, and well, some of them cars just weren't so lucky, and they were pretty much totaled. So after the races, they just kind of sort of got drug out to the corner and left for the ages. There is no telling the actual significant historical value of these cars, as there's probably no way to ever know who actually drove them. But we could probably be pretty sure that we may have known a name somewhere in the life of NASCAR. We would recognize that name, and they may have very well been behind the driver's wheel in one of these old cars on a late night NASCAR race. And here they are, trees growing up through them, just being lost to time. Eventually, Mother Nature, the river, history will simply take these away from us, and they'll be forgotten. And nobody will ever know the likes of those bump and grind, rubbing is racing, duke it out, shake hands, walk away, and be friends for the rest of their lives. I recently watched an interview between old Jack Ingram and Bob himself. And those guys were just reliving their memories, smiling, laughing, carrying on, talking about the old days of glory when they both raced around the Asheville Speedway here. You could see the smiles on their faces, and of course their eyes light up whenever they remembered those events. And well, old Mr. Ingram himself just simply said, well, I probably shouldn't have done that. Now, while we don't see it right here necessarily, but well, a little bit is still in there. If you walk around these walls and you find where the cement's kind of eroded away, you can still actually find some of the original red NASCAR paint still on these back walls. Now, they added all these walls, these outer walls, later on, but this right here is still the original inner wall of the new Asheville Speedway.